Drawing tree trunks in ink, directly in ink, so we can't erase any marks we make on the paper at all, that look realistic is as much what not to do in these opening stages as it is what to do. We don't want to make marks or lines that compromise our ability to get a realistic effect by the end of the drawing. And one of the largest ways we can stop ourselves from perhaps having tree trunks that look real is to be doing continuous lines, outlines, along each side of the branches and the trunks at this early stage. It's simply not an accurate way, firstly, I think, to capture the trunks, the branches, and how they look, how they bend accurately. And it also doesn't give the edge that we're going to want to have at the end of the drawing. And what I particularly want you to pay attention to at the very end of the drawing is the way the outlines on each side of the and I say outlines just so you know what I'm talking about, but the marks I use to define each side of the branch and of the tree trunk itself, to see how different they are, to see the great variety of marks that I've used, or sometimes where I've left very slight gaps in the outline, and just how effective that is at conveying the twists and the turns and the lighting, as well as the cylindrical shape of the tree trunk. That's probably the most important thing to do, I think, in this whole demo. So if you get a bit impatient with my hatching or whatever in bringing the three-dimensional aspect of the tree trunk to life, then at least go to the end and have a look at this and just see the difference, and try and imagine how less real it would look if there was a heavy continuous line defining the branches and the trunks. So because I'm not trying to do that, I want to put marks on the paper now that give me an idea of where the branches are and help me sort out where they are. I'm just using a lot of fairly faint marks with my 0.1mm pen, and I'm doing a lot of careful observation. I'm drawing this quite slowly. Look how I keep really changing the direction I draw these branches in. Firstly, I never try and draw too much at once, and I usually draw them in segments. And where they twist and turn, I particularly draw those parts in segments. I'm trying to capture the angles that we see between the branches and the trunk, or between one branch and another branch. I'm as much trying to draw by negative spacing as I am by seeing the angles. I'm trying to create the shapes between the branches, and that gives me a backup way of perceiving what's in the reference and of then trying to establish that accurately in my drawing. Sometimes I'll deliberately change the angles because I think it will bring greater clarity to what I'm drawing, or simply look more interesting to create perhaps less sameness in the gaps. But in this case, I think it's a really interesting set, tangle almost, of branches. But I do need to pay particular attention to what branches are bending away from me, which are bending towards me, even over the top of me, and with the branches one to another, what's in front, what's behind, and particularly what branches are actually coming out of a section of branch, and in which cases are they actually coming from behind the branch. And sometimes these branches that come from behind a branch, we can't actually really see clearly the branch behind the branch that they're coming from. And so it's tempting just to stick them onto the branch we can see. But it's always good to understand the underlying structure if we want our tree trunks to look realistic in our branches. And of course, we have to work out where is the light and how is this impacting what we're seeing. See, I'm still establishing these branches with my marks. Light ones that will enable me to make lots of adjustments when I'm trying to create the final realistic effect. But where's the light coming from, and how is it reflecting on the branches? And remember that very often on the very edge of a branch, even where that's the side that the shade is on. Because of the cylindrical shape and because the fact that light bounces around, often that very strip is not actually as dark as a little bit in from the edge. And that's a great lighter value to try and capture in our drawing. Again, it means we need to slow down a bit when we're actually doing our hatching. And I'm just starting now doing some of the hatching. But what I'm actually doing is I'm doing the hatching for the other reason, which is the colour. Nothing to do with the shade and the shadows, but the colour. And we've got this pale bark that's still attached to the tree. Now, the values are pretty similar. If we were to remove the colour from this, I'm not sure there'd be that much difference between the pale grey bark and the pale cream. Well, it's basically the new bark underneath that hasn't weathered to that dull grey. But take out the colour and they're a fairly similar value. But I want to emphasise the colour because the dappled effect of the bark and the strips of the old bark and the dappled spots of old bark that haven't yet come off really visually a part of what makes this tree look like this tree, this type of eucalyptus. So I think it's important to try and capture that. So I'm going to emphasize the grey bark a little more than it really is in life. And again, this is where it's very helpful to understand the difference between the value and the colour, the darkness of the colour and the colour itself. And the best way to practice this is simply to get coloured photos on your phone and take the colour out with the photo app and just see how it changes. See which colours end up looking the same and which colours end up looking quite different. So I'm at this point though just doing hatching to capture that grey colour, and then when I've done that basically all over, I'm going to start to do additional hatching now over the top to get the shadow and the shade effects. And because they're going to be producing in every instance darker values than the value of the bark, I need to do the bark hatching first so that then I can see exactly how much darker I need to do the rest. I'm also, with this shading, paying particular attention to the twists and turns of the branches, because where a branch comes towards us, often in the what would you call it, the elbow of the bend, that's where the values will be slightly darker than before or after that. And so it's trying to see where perhaps a whole branch at a glance looks like it's in shade. If we look carefully, we'll see in fact that some parts, according to the direction that the branch is moving, will be darker or lighter in value. But if we also look at the width of the branch, some parts of that width will be darker, and it might be more to one side, might be dead in the middle, but there's probably going to be a faint halo effect from this bouncing light down each side, but it may be more pronounced on one side than the other. Again, it all depends on the direction of the branch and where the sun's coming from and how strong the sun is. But if we're aware that these things make a difference to how the values are perceived on our trunks and branches, then we're able to look for them and then start to catch the differences in how we do our hatching, particularly when we do the darker parts at the end. At this point, I'm still putting the grey colour hatching on for the trunk. Now, I want this to be a fairly minimal line drawing. I don't want to have unnecessary marks on this, and I want the effect overall to feel quite light and airy. Maybe that's just reflecting the bright, airy, sunny day and the fact that there was nothing around this tree. It looks as if it were dead, but in fact there was some leaf, some foliage on this higher up. And I love the fact we had these two branches sort of coming out towards us with very much an elbow shape, producing interesting shadows, but also interesting curves. So now I'm starting to do some hatching for the shade, and I'm also starting to define some of the edges now, but I'm still not doing my final work on the edges. That will happen right at the end. And as I said, make sure you see that and you actually have a look at the finished drawing to see the difference from one part of the tree trunk, one side of the tree trunk even to the other, and from branch to branch, and from side of the branch to side of the branch, and according to how the branch is twisting and turning, the ways I've changed the marks I've used for the silhouette of the branch accordingly. And how much of a sense I think realism that introduces, and how if I'd just done an outline at the very start, it would have created this cartoon-like effect that I couldn't have got rid of. If I were drawing in pencil, then I would at least have the chance to erase some lines that were a bit heavy-handed perhaps, but that's not the case with pen, of course, so I need to therefore develop a technique, a way of thinking about my drawing process and developing my drawing on the paper that lets me leave till the end the final marks that will create the definition that I want. Because our ability to understand what's happening with this tree, that the branches are twisting and turning, to get a real sense of three-dimensionality to them, will depend not on outlines, that will just make them all look very flat as if they're the same distance from us, but on the hatching and the edge effects that I can create. Now, you're watching me draw this at 3 times my actual drawing speed, so if you want to see me do it a bit slower, you can use the cog icon to slow it down to half speed, which is only slightly faster than I'm drawing it. And my channel is now auto-dubbed, so there are 8 languages you can listen to this in. So if English isn't your best language, then perhaps the language you speak is one of the ones. So again, go to the settings and to audio, and you'll see the languages you can choose from. Or if you have a friend who draws and where English isn't their language at all, then please let them know that from the more recent videos on, my channel is available to them. I'm really now going branch by branch and working out what I'm doing. And having mostly established the tree, I'm now thinking of what context am I going to do? Is this just going to float in space, or is it going to have a little bit of context? And I always do like a bit of context. But I want to make sure that the tree stays the star. So I'm really now just trying to draw the grass, and this is actually a great demo on creating a grass effect. It's often a real difficulty for people. And in this case, I'm drawing it as much through negative space, through the shadow of the grass behind grass that is in the sunlight. And it's also a good example of the foreshortening that we usually need to do in this sort of scene. Because when I do some more hatching behind the closer hatching, I need to keep my lines much shorter, like a lot shorter, to give a sense of them being further back on a relatively flat surface. Yes, this is a slight rise going back. Now, I decided that I wasn't going to do the colour bond fencing and the houses, that I was going to put this on a crest of a hill, but I was going to put these trees off to the left just to define one of the sides and to be a bit of a counterbalance for the trunk. So keeping this though overall light, because I wanted to sit well back, and I certainly don't want it to compete in values or attention with the tree. So now I'm doing my final lines. These are the ones that I think will actually really speak. And I couldn't do these until I'd basically finished the drawing. But I also couldn't have done them if I'd already done lots of heavy ink around the edges. But now I can tweak some and really, I think, bring out some of the twists and turns and some of the directions of light. And you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. My post page, you'll find a link in the description that will take you there if you want to have a go drawing this yourself, and I hope you do. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting. I had a lot of fun doing it. And if you want more on trees, I have a trees playlist that I think you'd find very helpful. I even do leaves there. But in the end, whatever you draw, leaves or no leaves, trunks or no trunks, I hope you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.